Kensington Runestone. Evidence of Vikings in America? Close your eyes now. Let the world outside fall away. Feel the weight of your body sink deeper into your bed or chair. Let your breath slow, each inhale longer, softer. Each exhale carrying away the tension you didn't even know you held. This is your time, a quiet space where history will unfold like a dream, and you can drift along with it. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Are you curled beneath a blanket in a city apartment, or lying in the stillness of a countryside room? I like to imagine your voice joining all the others, a quiet thread in the tapestry of listeners who gather here under the same dark sky. You are here with me, and together we're stepping into a story that feels both impossibly distant and strangely close. It begins not with shouting, nor with the grand sweep of empires, but with the soft hush of wind over grass, the cool scent of rain still clinging to the earth, and a stone, a single stone, waiting in the darkness. The air is thick with the stillness that comes after twilight, when the last light has faded but the night hasn't yet fully taken hold. You're standing at the edge of a field in Minnesota. There's a gentle hum in your ears, the kind that's not really sound at all, but the awareness of everything around you, breathing in the quiet, and somewhere ahead, resting beneath the shadows of an old tree, is something the earth has been keeping secret for centuries. The grass brushes against your legs as you move forward. There's no rush. The ground is soft from earlier rain, and the scent of wet leaves lingers like a memory. You notice how the tree's roots seem to writhe just under the surface, like veins in the skin of the land itself. The bark is dark, slick in places, and then your fingers touch it. Cold, solid, unyielding, not bark, not root, but stone. It is larger than you imagined. Flat on one side, tilted slightly as though the ground has been pushing it up, trying to offer it to the air after years of holding it close. You kneel, your hand moves across its surface, and you feel lines, shallow, deliberate cuts, grooves that move in shapes your mind does not recognize. And in that moment, there's a sensation, small but undeniable. This is not random. It is not the work of nature. Someone's hands, long before your time, touched this stone the way you're touching it now. A soft shiver moves through you, though the air is still. You look closer, tracing the marks with your fingertips. The moonlight catches them, revealing their order, their rhythm. Symbols, letters perhaps, though none you can read. And with this realization, a question begins to form, quiet at first, but impossible to ignore. Who carved this? And why was it left here, hidden beneath the roots? You take a slow breath, letting the question linger like the echo of a bell. The night offers no answer, only the rustle of leaves above you. And yet, something inside tells you that this stone has been waiting for far more than your touch, waiting for someone to listen. You can almost imagine the scene as it must have been long ago. A group of figures gathered in this very place, the air heavy with the smell of wood smoke and damp earth. Their voices low, their eyes scanning the shadows beyond the trees. The sound of tools chipping into rock, steady and patient. The slow carving of a message they knew might outlast them all. And here you are, centuries later, feeling the weight of their presence as though they had only just stepped away. The wind slides over the field, carrying the faintest scent of pine and lake water. Above, the stars are cold and bright, watching as they have for thousands of years. But there's something else in the stillness tonight, something that hums at the edge of your awareness. Not a sound, not a sight, but a sense that what you've found is part of something far larger. The stone is a fragment, a single page torn from a book whose rest lies scattered and hidden. And suddenly you wonder, what if the stories you've been told about this land are incomplete? What if there are chapters missing? Entire histories that never made it into the pages of your school books. Your breath slows again. You notice the way the cool air moves against your skin, the way the earth feels solid beneath you. The stone rests under your hand like a heartbeat frozen in time. You think about how many seasons have passed over it. Snow piling high, ice melting, summer storms break in against the leaves, all while it waited, silent. Somewhere in the darkness, a night bird calls, its voice low and mournful. The sound seems to stretch out across the field, and you find yourself listening to it as though it might carry an answer. But it doesn't, not yet. It only reminds you that this place is alive, that the land itself remembers even when we do not. And as you kneel there, your mind drifts to the shape of the symbols, the way they seem almost to move under your gaze. You imagine a ship with a single sail, gliding over water that reflects the sky. Men with pale hair and weathered faces, speaking in a tongue lost to your ear. A journey that carried them farther than they could have imagined, into rivers that curled like silver threads into the heart of a vast and unfamiliar land. You don't know yet who they were, or why they came, but you feel the truth of their presence in the grooves beneath your fingertips. You could stay here forever, in this moment. The night so still, the air so calm, your breath in perfect rhythm with the silence. Whatever the truth is, whether this stone is a message from the deep past or simply an echo of someone's imagination, it has already done its work. It has reached you. It has asked you to look closer, to listen deeper. And as you rise slowly to your feet, brushing the damp earth from your hands, you feel a strange mix of peace and urgency. Peace, because you are part of this moment now, connected to something older than memory. Urgency, because you know this is only the beginning. There is a story here, buried in moss and shadow, waiting to be told. The field stretches out before you, silvered in the moonlight. The stone rests where it has always rested, unbothered by your questions, patient in its silence. And somewhere in the dark, in the wind over the grass, in the whisper of leaves, a voice seems to ask, but why was it erased from history? The question hangs in the air, soft but unshakable, and you know you will follow it wherever it leads. The question lingers in your mind like the aftertaste of a dream you can't quite place. But why was it erased from history? The words circle you as you stand there in the cool night, the air brushing past as if carrying whispers from a time you've never known. The field feels bigger now, the shadows deeper, as if the stone's very presence has bent the shape of the world around it. You take another slow breath, letting your shoulders fall. The stillness is thick, but it's not empty. It's the kind of stillness that hums, that carries meaning. Your eyes wander to the tree that once held the stone in its roots, its dark branches stretching out like ancient fingers into the sky. That tree is gone now in the telling, but in your mind you see it standing tall, its leaves trembling under the weight of secrets buried beneath. The truth of what happened begins, as it often does, far from here and far before you. You can almost see the years peeling away. 1898, a bright summer day in the heart of Minnesota, the kind of day when the air smells of fresh soil and hay. when the sound of a horse's hooves on dirt roads carries for miles. A man named Olof Ullman is working the land, his sleeves rolled up, his back bent with the quiet patience of someone who understands the earth. He digs near the roots of an aspen tree, its pale bark standing against the green around it. His shovel hits something hard, not the dull clunk of stone he's used to, but something heavier, deeper, more deliberate. You imagine him pausing, leaning on the handle of the shovel, wiping the sweat from his brow as the breeze runs its fingers through the grass. Then the digging resumes, each stroke bringing up more of the dark soil, until at last the thing is revealed. A slab of grey stone, flat, its edges softened by time. The roots of the aspen snake across its face, clinging to the grooves that cut across its surface. He doesn't know what it is at first. How could he? The markings are strange, straight lines, angled strokes, dots and slashes arranged in a way that no plough or tool could make. He carries it to his yard, sets it upright, brushes the soil from it. The neighbours come. They gather around, voices low, each person running their hand across the carved surface. Some say it's a curiosity, others think it's nothing. But somewhere in the crowd, someone knows these marks, or at least has heard of them. Runes, Old Norse runes. It's here that the tone of the story shifts. What was once just a farmer's strange find becomes something that could, if true, rewrite the story of this land. The news spreads. Scholars from nearby towns come to look, then scholars from farther still. The runes are read, translated, debated. The words they uncover tell of an expedition. 8 Götalanders and 22 Norwegians, journeying deep into the interior in the year 1362. They speak of setting camp by the lake, of returning to find 10 men red with blood and dead. It is a message carved in stone, in a language no farmer in rural Minnesota should have been able to invent. And yet, as quickly as the excitement blooms, so too does the doubt. Some experts declare it a forgery almost immediately. The language, they say, is suspiciously modern in parts. The runes mix styles from different centuries. It is, they conclude, a clever trick. You feel the sting of that dismissal even now, as if the stone itself could feel insult. You picture it being set aside, its mystery labelled and filed away in the cabinets of the disbelieving. And yet, in the quiet of your mind, you also picture the carving itself, each stroke of the chisel, each careful line, made by someone who knew they might not survive to tell their story in person. The moon slips behind a cloud as the narrative in your mind unfolds, the shadows deepening in the field around you. You realize that in this version, told slow and soft, you can hold both truths at once, the scholar's doubt and the dreamer's wonder. Because whether the inscription was made in the 14th century by lost Norse travellers or in the 19th century by a farmer with a taste for mischief, it still has power. The power to make you ask what if, the power to push against the edges of the known. And so you imagine the runestone's first night above ground. Maybe the air was warm, the sky thick with stars. Maybe Olaf sat outside with a lantern, running his fingers over the symbols the same way you did earlier, wondering who else had touched them. The flickering light casting shadows into the grooves, making them look almost alive. He could not have known then how far his find would travel, nor how much argument it would stir. You walk slowly now in the story's present, feeling the damp grass beneath your feet, the cool air brushing your skin. You're walking both in this Minnesota night and in that summer day more than a century ago. The two moments drift over each other, their edges blurred, like reflections rippling on the surface of a dark lake. Somewhere in the silence, a deeper question forms. If the stone truly is from 1362, then its carvers were here before Columbus, before the maps were redrawn to include this land. They came by rivers and lakes, through forests so dense the sun barely reached the ground. They carved their names, their fate, into a stone, and left it where someone might one day find it. But if it is a forgery, then why does it feel older than the roots that once held it? Why does it carry that strange hum in the air around it, the sense that you are standing in the presence of something that matters? You reach the place where you first touched it earlier tonight, your fingers tracing the grooves once more. They're cool under your skin, unchanging. And yet you change. Each time you return, you feel a stillness settle deeper in you, like the stone is sharing a little of its long patience. The night holds you there, wrapped in its quiet. You let yourself breathe slowly, each inhale filling you with the damp scent of earth and grass, each exhale releasing the weight of the day. You feel safe here, though you're surrounded by shadow. Safe, because the stone has been here so much longer than you. It knows how to endure the waiting, and in that moment, you understand something. The story of the Kensington Runestone is not just about who carved it, or when, or why. It is about the way it waits, the way it keeps its silence until someone is ready to lean close and listen. Far away, you hear the faint ripple of water, the call of a bird you don't recognize. The sounds fold into the stillness, becoming part of the memory you are making now. And somewhere, behind the rustle of leaves, the question returns, softer this time but no less insistent. But why was it erased from history? The night doesn't answer. Not yet, but you know it will lead you deeper if you keep following. The field is quiet again, yet you can feel the weight of the question pressing against the air around you. But why was it erased from history? It feels less like an accusation now and more like an invitation, one that draws you backward in time, step by step, until the cool night and the grass beneath your feet fade into another place entirely. You let your breath slow, let your body soften, as if you're drifting into a dream you've been waiting for all your life. The world reshapes itself. The damp scent of the Minnesota field gives way to the warm, loamy smell of earth turned by a farmer's shovel. The year's 1898, and Olof Åman stands in the pale shade of an aspen tree. A simple man living a simple life. His hands are thick and calloused from years of labour, his back curved from the weight of the soil's demands. His days follow the sun, his seasons follow the land. It is a summer morning, early, the air just beginning to heat under the blue sky. Olof is digging with his son, the scrape of metal on dirt mixing with the creak of roots as they give way. The aspen's trunk stands tall, white and smooth in the sunlight. Beneath the roots, the earth is dark, moist, cool to the touch. Then, a sound. The shovel strikes something with a sharp, ringing note. Not wood, not root, stone. At first, he thinks it's just another rock, the kind that stubbornly refuses to move. But as the dirt is cleared, the rock's shape begins to emerge, flat, heavy, unlike the others. When it finally comes free, he sees it's not raw and jagged, but carved. Lines run across its face, straight and purposeful. They catch the sunlight in strange ways, as though the stone has been waiting for this moment, to breathe again under the open sky. Olof runs a hand across it. The markings are deep enough to hold shadows. They are not letters he knows, nor any language he can name. He calls his neighbours to see it. They come, wiping their hands on their aprons or leaning on canes, curious and quiet. The stone is set upright in the yard, the dirt still clinging to its edges, and the people gather round it in a loose circle. No one laughs. They look at it the way one might look at something sacred or dangerous. Word spreads quickly. Someone remembers seeing similar marks in a book of old languages. Runes, they are called. A man from the nearest town writes to a professor, who writes to another, and soon there are men in dark coats arriving to see the find for themselves. They take notes, they measure, they copy the carvings onto paper. The first translation comes slowly, piece by piece, like pulling threads from a tangled cloth. The words are stark, almost cold. 8 Götalanders and 22 Norwegians on an exploration journey from Vinland over the west. We had a camp by 2 skerries one day's journey north from this stone. We went fishing one day. When we came home, we found 10 men, red with blood, and dead. Ave Maria, save us from evil. It is a voice from across 5 centuries speaking of loss, of fear, of prayer. The date carved at the bottom is even stranger, 1362. You can feel Olof's confusion in the memory you're holding. How could this be? This is America, the America of railroads and farms, not of Norse explorers. The experts argue quickly. Some say the stone is too perfect, the runes too mixed in style. Others insist that such knowledge was rare in the 19th century, far rarer in the hands of a farmer. The debates begin, and with them, the first threads of doubt are sewn into the stone story. In the telling, the summer air around you thickens. You can feel the weight of the scholars' glances, the way they examine not only the stone but Olof himself, his accent, his background, the calluses on his hands. They search for motive as if the truth must be hidden somewhere in his manner, and when they cannot agree, they begin to pull back. The newspapers carry the story for a while, and then the tone shifts. What was once a wonder becomes a curiosity. What was once a possibility becomes a punchline. By the end of the year, the stone is no longer a mystery to be solved. It is a hoax to be remembered. The official record begins to close around it, sealing it in a narrative that will not be reopened for decades. You step back in the memory, letting the scene dissolve. The yard, the neighbours, the men in their coats all fade into the dark. You're standing in the present again, the cool Minnesota night pressing gently against your skin. The stone is here, in front of you, unchanged by the years of debate. The grooves are still deep, the surface still holds the light, and though the world may have dismissed it, the question remains, heavier now. If this is not what they say it is, then what is it? The wind moves through the grass, a low whisper like water over stone. You close your eyes and let the sound wash over you. Somewhere, deep in your chest, you feel the pull of the story, the need to follow the thread beyond what is written, to step into the spaces the history books leave empty. You see the aspen's roots curling around the stone, holding it close for centuries, and you wonder what else the earth might be hiding. There's a strange comfort in that thought, that the land remembers more than we do. It holds the echoes of footsteps, the fragments of languages, the dust of fires long gone cold. Maybe the Kensington Runestone is just one echo, carried forward on the tide of time until it surfaced in Olaf Oman's field. Or maybe it is something more, a signpost pointing toward a chapter of history we're not yet ready to understand. You breathe in the night air again, slow and deep. Let your body sink into the moment. Let the mystery wrap around you like a blanket. The past is still out there, waiting in the shadows, patient as stone. And in that stillness, the question stirs again, not louder, but closer now, like someone leaning in to whisper it directly into your ear. But why was it erased from history? You know that to answer it, you'll have to keep walking deeper, and so you do. The night folds in around you like a slow breath. The grass sways softly, the air cool against your skin, and the stone surface seems almost to glow in the pale wash of moonlight. You keep your hand on it a moment longer, feeling the faint dips and ridges of the carvings. They are quiet now, but they hold a voice carried through time, waiting to be heard. You let your eyes close, letting the cool earth beneath your feet and the stillness of the fields settle you. Your body feels heavier now, your shoulders looser. You let the weight of the day slip away piece by piece as you step backward in your mind. The field fades, the night fades, and in their place a new image forms, the stone not as it stands now, but as it first appeared in Olaf Omen's yard, cleaned of soil yet still carrying the scent of the earth that had cradled it for centuries. A few men in dark coats stand close, papers in hand, their voices low. They are bent over the stone, eyes tracing the lines, fingers tapping at their notes, a quiet huddle of concentration. Their lips move as they sound out shapes that are not their own, their eyes flicking between the grooves and the pages they've brought with them. These are scholars, men trained to read the languages of the past, and what they see here has unsettled them. One of them runs his hand along the top edge, as though hoping the stone itself will offer more than the symbols cut into it. Another murmurs something about Younger Futhark, the runic alphabet used by the Norse. Though this stone seems to hold more than one style, the mix is strange, as though the carver carried fragments of different ages in his mind, and then, in halting rhythm, they begin to translate. At first it's just small pieces. 8 Götalanders, 22 Norwegians, from Vinland westward, camp by 2 skerries. The words are dry, factual, and yet there's a pulse in them, a quiet urgency. The stone tells of a group far from home, making camp, fishing, returning to find 10 men dead. No details about the attack, no faces described, just the blunt truth of loss and the plea that follows. Ave Maria, save us from evil. The date is carved in runes too, 1362, and that number sits heavy in the air because it pushes against the edges of everything these men have been taught about the history of this land. Columbus wouldn't set sail for another 130 years. The official maps of the world would not yet include this vast continent. And yet, if the stone speaks the truth, Norsemen had been here, not just along the coasts, as in the sagas, but deep inland, far from the open sea. You open your eyes and find yourself back in the present, standing before the same stone. The carvings are worn, but they still hold the same shapes, the same words. And you think about how strange it must have been to be one of those first translators, to see history bending under the weight of something that should not exist. Not everyone believed, even then. Some argued the language was wrong, too modern in places, with forms of words that shouldn't have existed in the 14th century. Others said the mixture of runic styles was suspicious, the kind of thing someone might create if they'd only learned about runes from scattered books. And yet, those same books, those same exact rune forms, had not yet been widely published in English at the time of the stone's discovery. It's a contradiction that feels almost like a riddle. If the runes are wrong for the 14th century, how did they match documents that wouldn't be known in Minnesota until decades later? If the stone was a hoax, how did the hoaxer know things most scholars didn't? The moon drifts free of its cloud cover now, silvering the top of the stone. You let your fingers rest in one of the deeper grooves, feeling the shape of a letter whose sound you'll never quite know. You imagine the person who made it, perhaps sitting cross-legged on the ground, the stone lying flat before them, the chisel in their hand. The slow, steady work of cutting lines into something that will outlast them. The way each strike of the tool must have echoed in the quiet air, a sound that would carry far in the stillness of a northern forest. You wonder what they thought as they carved. Were they afraid? Exhausted? Did they imagine that someone hundreds of years later would read their words and know their fate? Or was the carving less about being remembered and more about leaving a trace, a mark against the forgetting? In your mind, you see them finish the last line, wipe the stone clean of chips, and stand in silence. Maybe they trace the letters with their fingers, the same way you are now, before walking away. The translation, you realize, is more than just words. It's a window into a moment. One day, one choice, one plea for safety carved into rock. And that makes the scholar's dismissal harder to sit with. Because whether the stone is real or false, its voice feels real. It speaks in the universal language of survival, of grief, of asking the sky for mercy. The wind picks up slightly, moving through the grass in long, slow waves. It sounds almost like the rush of water over a river's stones, and you picture those long-ago travellers following waterways that cut across the heart of the land. You imagine their small group pulling their craft onto the bank, carrying supplies, speaking in low voices as the day fades. You see them vanish into the forest with fishing lines and nets, never knowing what waited for them when they returned. Back in the present, you step back from the stone. The field stretches around you, open and quiet. But you can't shake the feeling that you're standing in the shadow of something vast. Not just this stone, but the story it represents. You think of all the languages that have fallen silent, all the names we've forgotten, all the journeys that have vanished from memory because no one carved them into something that could last. And here is one that did last, if only as a puzzle. A stone that speaks of people in a place they weren't supposed to be, at a time they weren't supposed to exist here. The facts may be argued endlessly, but the presence of the stone itself is undeniable. You let your breath slow again. The night has its own rhythm, and it pulls you into it. The soft chorus of insects, the low sigh of wind, the quiet heartbeat of the earth beneath your feet. The mystery will not be solved tonight, and that feels right. Some stories are meant to be walked through slowly, like long trails in deep woods. The moonlight slides down the stone's face as if tracing its lines, and you hear the question again, softer now, almost blending into the wind. But why was it erased from history? You turn toward the sound, but there is nothing there. Only the dark and the field and the stone, waiting. And you know this is where the next part of the journey will begin. The night holds you still for a moment longer, the stone at your side like a quiet companion. But the story will not stay rooted in this field. It begins to pull you outward, into the noise and light of the world beyond. You let your breath carry you there, slow and steady, like a boat moving downstream, and when the darkness fades from your mind, you're standing not under the open sky, but in a room full of voices. It is 1899 now, a year after Olof Oman lifted the stone from the roots of the aspen. The yard where it first stood has given way to drawing rooms, lecture halls, and museum offices. The runestone is no longer just a farmer's strange discovery. It is a subject of letters, debates, and small articles passed along in the corners of newspapers. People who have never seen it feel sure they already know what it is. The first wave of visitors came curious, open-minded, their eyes tracing the runes with the same careful attention Olof had given them. But as the weeks turned to months, curiosity began to twist. Experts came, each with their own books and theories, each ready to declare the stone either authentic or fraudulent within minutes. And their judgments did not stay in that small Minnesota town. They travelled, carried by telegraph wires and the printed page. You see a panel of professors sitting at a long table, the stone's inscription copied neatly before them. Their eyes are sharp, their voices measured. One clears his throat and begins to list the ways the runes fail to match the 14th century forms. Another points to certain words, phrases that, in his view, sound suspiciously modern. They speak not to each other, but to the invisible weight of the academic world behind them. In the corner of the room, Olof sits quietly, his hat in his hands. He's a man out of place here, his farm clothes and sun-darkened skin marking him as someone from outside this circle of polished speech. They look at him with a kind of polite distance, as though he is part of the curiosity, not just the one who found it. When the meeting ends, the conclusion is clear. The stone is a forgery. The professor's words will be printed in journals and newspapers, their reasoning accepted by many without question. For them, the mystery is closed. But outside these halls, the story has taken root in a different way. In towns across the Midwest, in Scandinavian immigrant communities, the runestone is more than a debate over language. It is a thread of belonging, a sign, true or not, that their people had touched this land long before it was called America. You can see the two versions of the story taking shape at the same time, like twin rivers winding away from the same source. In one, the runestone is a fraud, a curiosity best left to gather dust in a museum's basement. In the other, it is a relic of a forgotten chapter, proof that their ancestors reached into the heart of the continent centuries before Columbus. The clash of these two stories hums in the air. You feel it even now, standing in the present, the stone cool under your hand. There is a kind of sadness in the way the official verdict smothered the excitement so quickly, like a fire starved of air. And yet, you know how history works. It is not always the truth that survives, but the version that is easiest to repeat. In the America of 1900, the idea that Norse explorers had travelled thousands of miles inland was not just unlikely, it was an inconvenience. The official narrative was simple, clean, linear. The runestone was a jagged edge in that smooth story. You breathe in slowly, the field returning around you. The grass shifts under the night breeze, and somewhere far off an owl calls, low and deliberate. You imagine the sound travelling across the same miles that the story itself travelled, from farm to town, from town to city. The stone became something different in every place it was told, a marvel, a joke, a treasure, a trick. There is another layer to this part of the tale, one that moves in quieter spaces. In small gatherings, far from lecture halls, people would pass photographs of the stone from hand to hand. Some would trace the runes with their fingertips the way you do now. Others would tell stories, not of Olaf, but of ancestors who had spoken of pale-skinned visitors in the deep past. Stories of ships with dragon heads, of strangers who carried steel and strange speech. To them, the runestone was not proof of something new, but a reminder of something already known. You wonder how it felt for Olaf in those years after the verdict, to walk back to his farm each evening knowing the world had decided what his discovery was, and what it wasn't. Did he believe the stone was genuine? Did he care about the scholars' arguments, or did he simply know what he'd seen that day under the aspen's roots? The moon overhead is high now, its light spilling silver across the field. You picture those same beams falling across his farm a century ago, the stone standing quietly outside while the rest of the world argued about it. In that stillness, the debates and headlines would mean nothing. The stone would remain what it had always been, silent, waiting, unchanged. And yet there is a sharpness to this part of the story. The moment the official record closes its pages, a certain kind of forgetting begins. Museums and universities decide what is worth remembering, and anything that does not fit neatly into the shelves is left to gather dust. You take another slow breath, letting your shoulders drop. The night air feels cool in your lungs. The runestone's fate in the public eye mirrors that of many strange finds, quickly judged, quickly stored away, quickly absent from the stories told to children in schools. But absence is not the same as disappearance. The stone was still there, still visible to those who went looking, still whispering its mystery to those willing to stand close enough to listen. The debate did not die completely. It simply moved out of the public glare and into the hands of the few who refused to let go of the question. Here, in this quiet field, you can feel how those two currents, dismissal and belief, have flowed alongside each other for over a century, and you can sense that neither has yet reached the sea. Somewhere beyond the grass the wind carries the scent of water. You let it pass over you, soft and steady, and you think of all the voices that have touched this story, the farmer, the professors, the dreamers, the skeptics. All of them are part of it now, just as you are. The field seems to lean in closer, the shadows thickening at the edges, and then, as before, the question comes. Not shouted, not even spoken aloud, just felt, as if the air itself is asking. But why was it erased from history? You know the answer is still far ahead, but you also know you're walking toward it. The field seems quieter now, as if the wind itself is listening. You stand with the stone, your hand resting gently against its cool surface, and you think about the long years between its unearthing and this night. The official verdict was written long ago, yet here it stands, still solid, still marked with symbols that resist forgetting. You take a slow breath and feel the weight of the contradictions pressing in. For all the certainty the early scholars claimed, their arguments left shadows, gaps where the light didn't reach. And in those shadows, other possibilities have continued to grow. The first is the wear on the stone itself. You run your fingers across the grooves again, feeling the faint softening of the edges, the way the stone's face has weathered. Experts who dismissed it called the carvings too sharp for something centuries old, yet later examinations found something stranger. Some edges are indeed crisp, but others are worn as if they have been exposed to wind and rain for a very long time. How could both be true? Then there is the matter of the runes. When the stone was found, critics said the language was too modern. Certain forms of words and letters did not match the 14th century. But decades later, researchers uncovered medieval documents from Scandinavia that showed some of those very forms in use. Documents unknown in Minnesota in 1898, and often unknown even to scholars outside Scandinavia. If Olof Öhman had been a forger, how could he have used rune forms that would not be verified until long after his lifetime? The contradiction deepens. You imagine two truths laid out side by side, each impossible if the other is real. The skeptics cannot explain the matching rune forms without admitting the carver had knowledge beyond his time. The believers cannot explain the language shifts without imagining a group of travellers whose dialect was unlike anything in the official record. You take a step back from the stone, the damp grass soft beneath your feet. The moonlight pools across the field, revealing every sway of the stems, every ripple of shadow. The air feels heavy, as though the land itself is holding its breath. Another detail presses into your mind, the location. If the inscription is real, these Norse travellers had come not just to the shores of North America, but far inland, through lakes and rivers that twist deep into the continent. It would have been an extraordinary journey, requiring not only ships but the ability to carry them overland between waterways, to navigate uncharted forests and face the uncertainty of a land no map had prepared them for. And yet, the waterways make it possible. You picture a route from Hudson Bay or the Great Lakes following rivers south and west, slipping through narrow channels where the trees meet overhead. You see the ships resting on the bank at night, the men gathered around a fire, the forest closing in around them. It is not an impossible journey, just one that demands a kind of persistence few would attempt. In your mind, the contradictions stack higher. The skeptics point to the modern-sounding words. The believers point to the matching medieval runes. The skeptics say no one could have travelled so far inland. The believers point to the rivers that stitch the continent together like hidden threads. You kneel beside the stone again, looking closely at one of the deeper carvings. The shadows gather inside the groove, making it look like a river in miniature, winding through the stone's pale surface. You think about how time works here, how centuries can pass with a stone buried in darkness, its edges preserved by the earth, until one day the roots of an aspen wrap around it and keep it hidden still. And then there's the human contradiction, Olaf himself. The skeptics say he was a clever hoaxer, yet no one could prove he had the knowledge to create the stone's inscriptions. The believers say he was simply the man who uncovered it, yet his quiet, private nature did little to defend the find against accusations. If he had sought fame, why did he not use the stone to raise his own name higher? Why allow it to become a source of ridicule in the public record? The wind moves again, slow and deliberate, carrying with it the faint scent of water from somewhere beyond the field. You follow it with your eyes, imagining the nearest river sliding quietly through the night, reflecting the moon in broken silver. Those rivers could carry ships. Those rivers could carry stories. Those rivers could carry a group of men into a place no one thought they had ever been. You let your mind wander further into this possibility. Perhaps the stone was not a message for us centuries later, but for their own people, a marker for another group to find, a warning carved into permanence. Perhaps they never meant it to be discovered by strangers at all. The contradictions make the stone feel more alive. It is not a neat artifact that fits into a box. It is a thing with edges that cut in both directions. Every attempt to solve it leaves threads loose, threads that lead back into the unknown. You remember the stories of other artifacts found in places they should not be. Coins from distant lands buried deep in North American soil, old maps showing shorelines unknown to the cartographers who supposedly drew them. The runestone is not alone in its defiance of the official timeline. It stands among a small, strange company of objects that whisper of a past more complex than we have been taught. The night presses close again, the stars cold above you. You step around the stone slowly, feeling the change in its surface as the light shifts. Each angle tells a different story. Each groove catches the moon in its own way. And then the thought comes, maybe the contradictions are not flaws at all, but part of its truth. Maybe the runestone carries the marks of a journey that was itself fragmented, shaped by many hands, many voices, many moments in time. A dialect born of distance, a mixture of rune forms because knowledge travelled unevenly. Perhaps the contradictions are the record of something real, not the sign of a forgery. You close your eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. The air is cool, damp, alive with the faint rustle of grass. The stone is steady beneath your hand, as if it has been waiting for you to arrive at this thought. And just as you feel that stillness settle over you, the question returns, not louder, but clearer, like the sound of a bell far away. But why was it erased from history? You open your eyes to the moonlit field, and you know the contradictions are not enough to silence the stone. They are only the beginning. The wind shifts, and with it comes the faint, clean scent of water. You lift your eyes from the runestone and look beyond the field, into the darkness where the land falls away toward hidden lakes and slow-moving rivers. The moonlight spills silver over the grass, but beyond its reach, the blackness hides something older than the stone itself, the pathways of the land. It's here, you think, that the real journey begins. Not with the chisel in a carver's hand, but with the rivers that coil and branch across the heart of North America like veins under the skin. Long before the maps were drawn, before the borders were claimed, these waters had already carved their own lines through the continent. You close your eyes and let yourself drift back. Centuries before Olof Oman's shovel struck the aspen's roots. The world grows quieter, the air heavier with the green smell of dense forests. You hear the low splash of paddles dipping into a dark river, the faint creak of wood as a vessel moves upstream. The night sky above is the same one you see now, scattered with cold stars, but there are no roads, no fences, no wires cutting across it. They could have come this way, you think. The men whose presence is carved into the runestone. From the distant coastlines touched by Norse ships in the sagas, into the inlets and bays of the Great Lakes, and then farther still, guided by the thread-like rivers that lead deep into the interior. It is not impossible. In your mind you trace their path. Perhaps they entered from Hudson Bay, their small ships riding the tides before slipping into the river mouths. Perhaps they came through the waters of Lake Superior, its vastness like a cold inland sea, and from there followed smaller channels, winding into lands where only the trees and the wind knew their names. These rivers are not wide and easy. They twist, narrow, and break into rapids, forcing the travellers to carry their vessels across the land to the next stretch of water. You picture them hauling their ships over rocky ground, their breath clouding in the air, their boots sinking into moss. Their voices echo low in the forest, the strange rhythm of their language scattering birds from the branches above. At night they make camp on the banks, the firelight flickering on their faces, the air heavy with the scent of pine and wood smoke. The forest is alive around them, the snap of a twig in the dark, the slow lap of water against the shore. The land here is beautiful but unyielding. Lakes spread out like mirrors in the day, catching the sky's every mood. Rivers cut through the trees in sudden gleams of silver. The forests themselves are a world, endless ranks of pines, maples, and oaks, their leaves whispering in a language that has no beginning and no end. The air smells of wet soil and growing things, of rain before it comes. If they reached this far, to the place where the stone was found centuries later, it would have been through these waterways, guided by currents and instincts, driven perhaps by trade, by exploration, or by necessity. And here, far from their home and everything they knew, they left their mark. You open your eyes again to the present. The field lies quiet, but you can feel the rivers under the surface of the story, flowing unseen, carrying it forward. The runestone is not an isolated mystery. It belongs to the landscape that surrounds it. To understand it, you have to feel the weight of this land, the way it pulls you inward, deeper, until you are moving with it. The skeptics speak as though such a journey were unthinkable, but you can see the truth in the geography itself. The land invites travel in its own hidden way, not by road, but by water. The rivers and lakes are the oldest roads here, their routes unchanged for thousands of years. They carry fish in their depths, birds in their shallows, and sometimes perhaps strangers in their boats. And then there is the memory of the people who already lived here, the ones who knew every bend in these rivers, every place where the current quickens or slows. For them, the waterways were not unknown, they were home. Stories of strangers travelling by water might have been told in these lands long before Olaf's shovel struck the aspen root. You think of the oral histories carried by the Ojibwe and Dakota peoples, stories of visitors from across the great waters, pale-skinned and bearing tools of metal. Perhaps these accounts are separate from the runestone entirely. Perhaps they are echoes of the same events. Folklore has a way of blurring the lines between memory and myth, but like the rivers, it often flows from a source deeper than it seems. In the present, you hear the faint rustle of grass in the night wind. Somewhere beyond the dark edges of the field, a stream might be moving over stones, its sound no different now than it was centuries ago. The thought calms you. The rivers keep their own time. They do not care who names them or what stories are told about them. They keep flowing, carrying what they will. You kneel beside the runestone again, your palm flat on its face, and for a moment you imagine it resting not in a Minnesota field, but beside one of those rivers, half hidden by reeds. You see the water reflecting the shifting clouds, the air cool and damp. A small fire burns nearby, the figures who made the carving sitting close to it. Their voices low. They are far from home, but the river has brought them here, and in its steady movement they might feel the same strange calm you feel now. The landscape is a kind of witness in this story. The rivers have seen more than the scholars, more than the newspapers, more than the museums. They have carried people, messages, hopes and losses from one horizon to another. And somewhere along those currents, a stone was left to wait. You look up at the sky, the stars scattered like sparks above you. The same stars would have been there for them. though in different patterns, different seasons. You wonder if they stood on a riverbank and looked at those stars, wondering what they meant in a land so far from their own. The quiet deepens, and with it comes the familiar, patient question. But why was it erased from history? This time it feels almost as though the rivers themselves are asking, the ones that carried the story here, only to watch it be hidden away. You breathe deeply, letting the thought sink into you. The runestone is not just a mystery carved into stone, it is a mystery carved into the land itself. And the land, you know, keeps its secrets for as long as it must. The wind softens again, and you find yourself staring beyond the field, past the invisible rivers and lakes, towards something even farther away. Not a place, but a map. Not the kind you fold and keep in your pocket, but the kind painted on ancient vellum. The ink faded to a brown whisper, the edges frayed like the memory of a dream. You let your body loosen and your breath slow, as though you're drifting over an ocean. In your mind, the map is spread out before you on a wooden table, the flicker of lamplight making its coastline shimmer. Its surface is crowded with seas and lands, drawn in shapes that are almost right but not quite, as though the hand that drew them knew of the places but had never walked their shores. Among these faint lines and curling letters, there is a shape you know, not from the stories of Columbus, but from something older, a coastline on the far western edge of the map, marked with a name that should not be there. Vinland. It is the land of the Norse sagas, a place said to be rich with grapes and wild grain, a place reached by ships from Greenland long before the familiar history books begin. You imagine the mapmaker hunched over the parchment centuries ago, his quill moving in patient strokes. How did he know to draw this place? Who told him where it lay? Was it the memory of travellers who returned home with their stories, or the whispered accounts of others who never came back? The Vinland map, whether real or forged, is only one of many old charts that carry strange hints. There are others, their names less famous, that show lands and coastlines years before their official discovery. Some scholars call these mistakes, the result of guesswork or copying from older maps without understanding them. But others wonder if they are the faint surviving lines of a history mostly erased. The runestone fits into this question like a missing piece of a puzzle you didn't know you were building. If the Norse had come far enough to reach Vinland, if their ships had touched the shores of North America, then perhaps the rivers and lakes had carried them deeper still. And if so, perhaps the Kensington Runestone is not an isolated voice, but one of several markers left behind. You open your eyes, and the night feel returns. The runestone is steady under your hand, but you see it now as part of a larger web, each thread leading outward, to the old maps, to the sagas, to the scattered artifacts found in places they shouldn't be. Each is faint on its own, but together they form a shape that begins to look like a story. In your mind, you follow the trail backward, from the Minnesota field to the rivers, from the rivers to the lakes, from the lakes to the sea, across the cold Atlantic, past the ice of Greenland, to the fjords of Norway and the markets of medieval Europe. A line connecting two worlds, drawn not in ink, but in possibility. The thought is soothing in a strange way. You imagine the sailors on those long voyages, their ships rising and falling over the waves, the salt spray on their faces, the sun burning through the mist. At night, they would spread their own maps out, perhaps no more than scraps of parchment marked with runes or crude shapes. Their charts would not have been perfect, but they would have been enough to carry them across the open sea. And yet, for all the journeys they may have made, so little of their story remains in the official record. It is as if the maps that once held their roots were folded away in some dark place, left to fade, while a different version of history was drawn over them. You think of the Vinland map again, and the debates that have surrounded it. For some, it is a treasure, proof that medieval Europeans knew of North America long before Columbus. For others, it is a forgery, crafted to stir controversy. The truth is tangled in the same way the runestone's truth is tangled, part fact, part doubt, part longing to believe. The moonlight seems brighter now, casting the runestone's shadow across the grass. You look at that shadow and think of the shadows on the old maps, places hinted at but not fully drawn, lands whose outlines are blurred by the uncertainty of memory. And then you wonder, what if the stone itself is a kind of map? Not of coastlines and rivers, but of a journey, a path carved into words instead of lines. It speaks of a camp by two skerries, of a day's travel north to where the stone lies. For those who knew the land, those words might have been enough to find their way back. You can almost see it, the travellers using natural markers instead of drawn maps, the rivers and the stars guiding them. The runestone's inscription could be a coordinate of sorts, one piece of a larger system we no longer understand. Without the other pieces, it looks like a mystery. With them, it might have been clear. The air grows still again. The night holds that stillness like a map holds ink, keeping it in place, unchanging, even as the world moves around it. You breathe deeply, letting the quiet settle over you, and you feel the pull of those distant coastlines, those forgotten routes. Perhaps the old maps are not mistakes at all. Perhaps they are the last surviving witnesses to a time when the edges of the known world were wider, when ships crossed the seas and rivers without leaving behind the names and dates we rely on now. The Kensington Runestone, the Vinland map, the scattered finds. They might be fragments of the same chart, drawn not to impress the future, but to serve the present of their makers. You imagine unrolling that map in full, every river, every shoreline, every marker, and seeing the path that leads to this very field. But the map is incomplete, the parchment torn. The missing parts may be gone forever, or they may still be out there, hidden in some library, buried in the earth, waiting like the runestone did. The thought makes you smile softly in the dark. Because if one piece could wait for centuries beneath the roots of a tree, another could be waiting still. And as you stand there, the question returns once more, gentle but persistent. But why was it erased from history? Perhaps the answer lies not in the maps themselves, but in who was allowed to draw them. The stillness of the field begins to change, like a slow tide drawing you back toward the noise of the world. The rivers fade, the old maps curl away into the dark, and the flicker of lamplight on vellum gives way to another kind of light, sharper, colder, the kind that fills lecture halls and meeting rooms. You breathe deeply, letting your shoulders remain loose, even as the story shifts into a place where the quiet is replaced by the deliberate cadence of official voices. You're in a room lined with shelves of books, the air thick with the smell of paper and dust. Men in heavy coats sit at a long table, each with a notebook open before him. On the table, a copy of the runestone's inscription lies in careful handwriting, every rune faithfully drawn. The real stone is far away now. This is the world of the orthodox account. The neat columns, the ruled margins, the conclusions written in firm strokes of ink. Here, the story is not about rivers and voyages. It is about control of language, of history, of what is allowed to be believed. The scholars speak in measured tones, weighing each word with the precision of someone shaping a verdict. One points to the shape of a rune, declaring it too modern for the 14th century. Another remarks on the phrasing of certain lines. Grammar, he says, that would not have existed in the Middle Ages. They turn the stone into an equation. Knowledge available in 1898, plus access to books on runes equals forgery. The simplicity of the math appeals to them. A farmer, they reason, could have seen runes in an illustrated text, copied them without true understanding, and invented a story to go with them. It is neat, clean, and it allows the known history of America to remain unshaken. In this version, the runestone is nothing more than a curiosity, a local prank, a bit of folklore born not from ancient journeys, but from the boredom or ambition of a 19th century immigrant. The orthodox explanation paints Olof Oman as either a trickster or a gullible man taken in by someone else's joke. The voices around the table agree, perhaps not on every detail, but on the outcome. It is not real. You stand in the corner of this imagined room, unseen, listening. There is something in the tone of their voices that is not just skepticism, but relief. If the stone is false, then the questions it raises can be neatly put away. No need to redraw maps. No need to rewrite chapters of history. The world remains exactly as they have taught it. Outside this room, their verdict spreads quickly. The newspapers carry headlines about the debunked runestone. Museums treat it as an oddity rather than an artifact. By the middle of the 20th century, the orthodox account has hardened into fact, or at least into something treated as fact. Ask a historian, and they will tell you, it's a fake. But standing here in the night, with the real stone under your hand, you can feel how fragile that certainty really is. The orthodox account, for all its authority, leaves holes in its own argument. It does not explain the rune forms that match later discovered medieval examples. It does not account for the stone's weathering, or for the oral traditions that hint at ancient visitors. It solves the problem only by ignoring parts of it. You let your eyes drift closed, breathing slowly. The room fades. The scholars and their ledgers dissolve into shadow, and the field returns around you. You hear the insects again, the slow rustle of grass, the faint pulse of the night. The runestone is here, not in some distant archive, and its presence feels heavier than any verdict written on paper. And yet, you can understand why the orthodox version has held for so long. It is tidy. It keeps the story of America's discovery simple, linear, unbroken. It does not require admitting that history might have been more complex, that strangers may have stood in this land centuries before the official dates. It does not open the door to the uncomfortable thought that what we know is only a fragment of what has been. In the quiet, you think about how power works in stories, the ones repeated in classrooms, printed in books, stamped into plaques. Those are the ones that endure. The others, no matter how compelling, are left in the margins, their voices fading unless someone leans close enough to hear them. You run your hand over the stone again, feeling the grooves that the orthodox account says are meaningless. They don't feel meaningless. They feel deliberate, steady, made by someone with a reason. Whether that reason was born in 1362 or 1898, you cannot yet say, but you know it is not nothing. The orthodox version is a wall. Beyond it, the world is orderly, mapped, named. But here in the field, you can feel the weight of what might be behind it. The unknown, the forgotten, the erased. And then the question comes again, softer this time, almost like a breath against your ear. But why was it erased from history? The orthodox account would tell you it was never there to erase. But the stone, steady beneath your hand, seems to hum with a different answer. Somewhere between the rivers and the maps, between the verdicts and the silences, the truth waits. The air in the field feels a little different now, as though the weight of the orthodox verdict has passed overhead like a cloud and the sky has cleared again. The moonlight lies gentle across the grass, the runestone a dark, steady shape in its midst. You rest your palm against it and breathe slowly, letting the stillness wrap around you. For a moment, you think of those who have refused to accept the verdict that declared the stone a fraud, not because they are eager to believe anything mysterious, but because they have looked closely and found reasons the official dismissal does not fully hold. These are the voices of the alternative account, quieter, fewer in number, but persistent. You picture one of them, not in a lecture hall but in the open air, crouched beside the stone the way you are now. He carries a magnifying glass in one hand, a notebook in the other. His fingertips trace the grooves with care, the way a doctor might trace the outline of a pulse. He's not here to defend the stone out of sentiment, but to test it against the things he knows. The first thing the believers point to is the weathering. The stone's surface is not fresh cut. Some of the grooves have softened at the edges, as though wind, rain and ice have passed over them for far longer than a century. They note the pattern of lichen growth, how it seems to match that of stones left undisturbed for generations. For them, the physical condition is not the mark of a recent hoax, but the quiet signature of age. Then there are the runes themselves. The skeptics saw in them a sign of forgery, a mixture of old and modern forms. But later studies uncovered medieval inscriptions in Sweden and Norway that showed the same unusual combinations. These inscriptions were unknown to most scholars in 1898 and almost certainly unknown to a farmer in rural Minnesota. For believers, this is not just coincidence. It is evidence that the carver used a dialect and style carried from the old world long before the books could record it. Some even bring in the testimony of the land. The waterways that stretch into Minnesota from the north and east form a natural network of travel, one that could have carried Norse explorers far inland. In this telling, the runestone is not an outlier, but a point along a plausible route, one that begins in the cold edges of the Atlantic and winds its way through lakes and rivers until it reaches this field. You let yourself picture that journey again. A crew of men rowing upriver, their oars dipping into dark water, the smell of pine and wet earth heavy in the air, the creak of wood, the call of a bird in the distance. They speak little. The work of moving against the current is slow and deliberate. Each bend in the river hides what lies ahead until it is almost upon them. The believers tell their story slowly, with the patience of those who know the world will not be convinced easily. They bring out photographs, side-by-side comparisons of rune forms, close-up images of the weathering on the stone's surface. They speak of other finds, Norse coins unearthed far from the coasts, old weapons buried deep in the soil. These objects may not prove the stone's truth on their own, but together they paint a picture that is hard to dismiss outright. You stand beside the runestone now, imagining the weight of all this evidence. It does not scream its truth, it whispers. And perhaps that is why it has survived at all. Because the loudest stories are often the first to be broken, while the quiet ones linger, patient as the stone itself. The believers also speak of motive, turning the skeptic's own question back on them. If Olof Oman forged the stone for fame, why did he never use it to gain wealth or position? Why did he seem almost uncomfortable in the attention it brought? And if it was a prank, why choose something so elaborate? Something requiring knowledge he did not appear to possess. In this version, Olof is not the author of the stone's message, but its messenger. The man who happened to dig in the right place, who carried the weight of something he could not fully explain. You kneel again, letting your fingers move slowly over the grooves. The moonlight catches the edges, throwing thin shadows inside the cuts. They feel deliberate, intentional. Whether made in 1362 or centuries later, someone wanted these words to last. And here they are, surviving storms, frost, and the slow creep of moss. The alternative theory is not a single answer, but a collection of possibilities. Some believe the carver was part of a Norse expedition that reached far inland, perhaps in search of resources or trade. Others suggest the stone might mark a burial site or a warning to those who followed. A few even imagine it as part of a larger chain of markers, a breadcrumb trail through the wilderness. You let these possibilities wash over you like the sound of a river. The truth might be one of them, or none of them, but the act of imagining feels like moving closer to the stone's heart. The skeptics and the believers walk in the same landscape but see different terrain. For the skeptic, the rivers are barriers, the runes are flawed, the weathering is inconclusive. For the believer, the rivers are roads, the runes are dialect, the weathering is proof. Both walk away certain they are right, but you, standing here in the field, can feel how the stone holds both stories at once, how it remains unmoved by either verdict, how it simply exists, as it has for centuries, carved and silent under the changing sky. Somewhere beyond the grass, an owl calls again, its voice low and steady. It sounds less like a question and more like a reminder that the night will outlast you, that the land will keep its secrets until it chooses to let them go. And in the rhythm of that sound, the familiar question rises once more. But why was it erased from history? Perhaps the believers are right. Perhaps it wasn't erased at all, but simply left in a place where only a few would find it. Perhaps we're only now learning how to listen. The night air feels heavier now, as though the grass, the trees, even the stone itself are leaning closer to listen. You draw in a slow breath, the coolness settling deep in your chest, and you realize that while the debates of scholars and the measurements of experts have their place, there is another current running beneath this story. It is older, softer, and it carries voices that have never needed books or lecture halls to survive. Folklore. You can almost hear it before you even think the word. The low murmur of stories told by firelight, the hum of voices passing down memories that may be older than any written record. It begins here, in this land, long before Olof Oman struck his shovel against the roots of the aspen. Imagine a night much like this one. The moon high, the forest surrounding a small clearing, the air smelling of smoke and pine. People sit close to the flames, the light flickering against their faces, shadows stretching out into the dark. The storyteller's voice is calm, deliberate, as they speak of a time when strangers came from across the great water. Their skin was pale, their clothes heavy and strange, their speech unlike any heard before. Some tales speak of trade, tools of iron given in exchange for furs, beads, or food. Others speak of caution, of sickness that followed in the stranger's wake, of quiet disappearances. And some tell of conflict, of blood spilled in the forest and on the shore. The details shift from one telling to another, but the shape of the story remains. They came, they stayed a while, and then they were gone. Among the Ojibwe and Dakota, there are fragments of such accounts, preserved not in ink but in memory. To the listeners of long ago, these were not myths. They were part of the remembered past, and in some versions there is mention of something left behind, a stone marked with strange symbols, standing where the river bends or near the shelter of rocks. You lean against the Kensington Runestone now, feeling its cool surface under your palm, and it's hard not to imagine that this is one of those stones, that it is the echo of those nights, a piece of the story that found its way into the earth and stayed there. Folklore does not need to be exact to be true. It moves like water, taking the shape of the land it flows through, carrying bits of history mixed with imagination. Over time, some parts are worn smooth, others are sharpened. What is constant is the sense of presence, the feeling that what is being told has weight. In some communities, elders tell of the strangers who came in the time before, their arrival marked by an unease in the animals, an unfamiliar smell in the air. In others, the story is quieter, a simple acknowledgement that there were visitors once from far away who left without taking the land but left traces of themselves behind. It's impossible to know how closely these stories align with the events the runestone describes, if they describe them at all. But when you listen to them, you can feel the parallels. The strangers in the oral traditions arrive in small groups. They travel by water. They leave marks, physical or otherwise, that outlast their time here. You imagine the carver of the runestone sitting in the same stillness you feel now, knowing they may not live to explain their work. Perhaps they had met the people of this land, exchanged goods, or stood together in wary silence. Perhaps they'd been warned of dangers deeper inland, dangers they would soon meet. And perhaps, after loss had struck, they carved their message for others, whether their own people or those who might follow, to find. Folklore gives room for such possibilities. It doesn't demand the precision of dates and names. It carries the essence. And sometimes, essence is what survives when the facts are buried. The wind shifts through the grass, carrying with it a faint rustle from the trees at the edge of the field. You imagine those trees standing 100, 500 years ago, hearing different voices speak in the night. The forest has always been a keeper of stories, its leaves turning them into whispers for anyone willing to pause and listen. Even now, there are locals who speak of the runestone as if it were part of the land's natural memory. Not a curiosity from the past, but a reminder of the layered history underfoot. Some call it the stone of the strangers. Others say it marks a place where something important happened, though what that was depends on who you ask. The skeptics may dismiss such talk as romantic invention, but the believers see it differently. Oral tradition, they argue, has carried details across centuries that written history has lost. It is not perfect, but neither is it empty. When a story is told in the same place, again and again, it begins to belong to that place, and in time, The place belongs to the story. You let the thoughts settle, feeling the way the runestone's presence changes the space around it. Even without knowing its exact origin, it draws the mind backward into the shadows of unrecorded time. It invites you to imagine, to connect the threads between a cold night in the 14th century, a summer morning in 1898, and this moment now. And in that connection, you hear it again, the question that has followed you through each turn of the story. But why was it erased from history? Perhaps it wasn't erased completely. Perhaps it lived on here, in the mouths of those who remembered, in the stories told when the fire burned low. Perhaps the erasure was not of the event itself, but of its place in the wider world's account. The story remained here, rooted like the trees, whispered like the river, while elsewhere it was folded away and forgotten. The night holds still around you. The fire in your imagined scene dies down to embers, the voices of the storytellers fading into the steady breath of the forest. You are alone with the stone again, but you do not feel alone. The stories are still here. They have always been here, and maybe, just maybe, they are enough to keep the truth alive. The night feels settled now, as though the land has finished speaking for the moment. The grass sways gently, the cool air moves against your skin, and the runestone stands as steady as it must have for centuries. You let your hand rest there a little longer, feeling not just the grooves in the stone, but the silence between them. It's in that silence that the next part of the story begins, not with discovery or debate, but with forgetting. It's strange to think of forgetting as an active thing, but here it was. Not the kind of forgetting that comes when people truly lose interest, but the kind that grows when interest is carefully guided elsewhere. In the decades after Olaf Omen's find, the runestone lived in half-light. For a time, it was shown in museums, examined in academic papers, mentioned in local histories. There were lectures, photographs, even postcards made for curious travellers. But slowly, piece by piece, it was moved out of view. By the middle of the 20th century, the official position was clear. The stone was a forgery. With that verdict came a slow withdrawal. University departments stopped funding new research. Articles in local papers became rare, replaced by shorter, dismissive mentions. Museum displays shrank until the runestone was no longer in the central halls, but tucked away where few visitors passed, and so silence began to grow around it. You can almost feel that silence now, standing in the open field. It's not empty, it has weight, the way a closed door has weight. Behind it the stone story remained, but it was no longer invited into the larger conversation of history. Imagine walking into a museum in the 1960s, a cool hush in the air, the sound of your footsteps echoing against the polished floor. The great halls are filled with artifacts that confirm the established past. Colonial furniture, portraits, tools and weapons from the recognized timelines. And somewhere, maybe in a small room at the edge of the building, stands the runestone. It waits there, its placard written with a few careful sentences that lean towards skepticism. Visitors pass by without lingering or skip the room entirely. In this way, a kind of erasure takes place, not by destroying the object, but by shaping how people encounter it. If you see something only in the margins, you are less likely to remember it. And if you do remember, you are more likely to treat it as a side note, not part of the main story. This is how the runestone's presence in the public imagination faded. Not gone, not destroyed, but dulled. a relic left to gather dust while the world moved on, and yet the stone remained. In Kensington itself, it was never entirely forgotten. Locals still told the story to visitors. Farmers and shopkeepers could point you toward the place where it had been found. A few devoted researchers kept their files open, waiting for new evidence to surface. You breathe in slowly now, letting the night fill your lungs. This quiet in the field feels different from the museum's quiet. Here, the silence is not meant to erase, it is simply part of the land. Out there, in the controlled spaces of institutions, silence can be an act of dismissal. Here, it feels like a form of protection. Still, you wonder about the people who might have stood in front of the runestone during those years of neglect. A student on a school trip, perhaps, who felt a flicker of curiosity that the guide's words didn't answer. A traveller from far away who had read about it once and wanted to see for themselves, only to find it standing under a small dim light. Maybe for some, the silence had the opposite effect. Maybe the lack of answers, the absence of attention, made them wonder more deeply. Why, they might have asked, was something like this not celebrated, not explored more fully? The more you think about it, the more you see how the runestone's silence mirrors the silence that hangs over so many historical anomalies. It is easier to set them aside than to let them shift the framework of what we know. The absence becomes part of the structure, the quiet gap where a disruptive story might have been. The wind moves again across the field, carrying the scent of damp earth. You close your eyes for a moment, feeling how different this open night is from the narrow halls of the museum in your mind. Here, the stone is not confined. It is part of the same landscape it has always belonged to. You can almost sense the decades passing, the slow fade of attention, the generations who grew up never hearing its name, unless they lived nearby. The stone waits through all of it, patient in a way that humans rarely are. And then, as the night deepens, the familiar question comes again, rising not from the stone, but from the space around it. But why was it erased from history? Maybe this part of the story holds one answer. Erasure can be as simple as giving people other things to look at, other stories to follow, other timelines to learn. Over time, the one you remove fades from view. But here, in this field, in the steady glow of the moon, you see that the stone has not faded at all. It stands in the same silence it always has, a silence that feels less like loss and more like waiting. And perhaps that waiting is the reason it has survived. The night has grown even stiller, as if the air itself is leaning in to hear what comes next. The grass bends softly under the breeze, but the runestone does not move. It never has, not in any way you could see. And yet, in the mind, it shifts constantly. The more you think about it, the less it is only a stone, and the more it becomes something else entirely. A symbol. You step closer, laying your palm flat against its cool, weathered face. The grooves under your fingertips are not just markings anymore. They are a fracture line, one that runs through the heart of history. On one side is the accepted story, neat and orderly, built from dates and records that fit together like the pieces of a puzzle. On the other side is the unknown, the things we cannot prove, the hints and whispers that don't fit in the frame. The Kensington Runestone stands right on that fracture, belonging fully to neither side. It is at once an object of the earth and an object of human hands, a message and a mystery. Whether it is truly from 1362 or not, it forces you to look at the edges of the story you've been told and realize that they might not be edges at all. You imagine it now not as it is here in the field, but as it might be in the mind's eye, suspended in darkness, a faint light glancing across its carved face. Around it swirl the words of scholars, believers, skeptics, locals, storytellers. None of them can quite touch it. They circle it instead, throwing shadows that shift depending on where they stand. Symbols gain their strength, not from certainty, but from endurance. The runestone has endured. It has outlasted the first wave of fascination, the wave of dismissal, the long decades of quiet. It remains, holding its own meaning whether or not anyone can agree on it. And that meaning is different for each who comes to see it. For some, it is a testament to curiosity, proof that our understanding of the past can still be unsettled. For others, it is a warning that people will go to great lengths to make a mystery seem real. And for many, it is something softer and more personal, a connection to ancestry, to a land they imagine their forebears once touched. In this way, the stone mirrors the people who stand before it. It reflects their hopes, their doubts, their own need for the past to tell a certain kind of story. You take a slow breath and imagine the fracture widening, not as a break, but as a space. On one side, the records we trust. On the other, the possibilities we've not yet proven. The runestone is the bridge between them, inviting you to step onto it and feel how the ground shifts beneath your feet. In that space, you can see other symbols. The Antikythera mechanism pulled from the sea after 2,000 years, showing that the ancients knew more of the stars than we thought. The Piri Reis map, with its strange outlines of Antarctic coasts long before they were officially charted. The Baghdad Battery, the Nazca Lines, all objects that sit in the same liminal place between what is known and what is suspected. The runestone belongs here, in this quiet company, not because it has proven true, but because it refuses to be forgotten. You step back and look at it in the moonlight. The stone is ordinary in shape, not towering or ornate. If you passed it in a forest without knowing, you might not look twice. Its power does not come from grandeur, but from the story it carries, or the possibility of that story. And that, you realize, is the heart of a symbol. It does not need to be accepted as fact to matter. It needs only to endure long enough for people to keep asking questions. You think about all the people who have stood before it, the tourists, the school children, the weary researchers with their cameras and notebooks. Each of them walked away carrying something different. For one, perhaps it was a spark of wonder. For another, a neat confirmation of doubt. For another still, simply a sense of quiet, that they had touched something old, whether or not it was ancient. The runestone doesn't tell you what to believe. It asks you to stand in the fracture and decide for yourself. And maybe that is why it unsettles so many. It does not fit the rules of how history is supposed to behave. It will not fall neatly into the boxes labelled true or false. Instead, it waits, holding its own counsel, knowing that in the long run, symbols do not need verdicts. They need endurance. The breeze brushes past you again, cool against your skin. In the hush, the thought comes that the runestone's greatest meaning might not be whether it is genuine, but that it has drawn so many eyes to the space between certainty and doubt. And in that moment, as you trace one of the deeper grooves, the question comes again, the same one that's followed you from the beginning. But why was it erased from history? Maybe because symbols like this are dangerous to tidy narratives. They are reminders that the past is not fixed, that it shifts like sand when the tide comes in. To erase the symbol is to try to still that movement. But here, under the moon, the stone remains. It does not move, it does not speak, and yet it keeps the fracture open for anyone willing to see it. You let your hand fall to your side, breathing deeply, the scent of grass and cool stone filling your senses. The runestone may be carved with words, but its meaning lies as much in what it does not say, and maybe that is why it is still here. The night around you feels as if it's holding its breath. The field is still, the grass leaning softly under a slow wind, and the runestone stands unmoved. Yet something has shifted, not in the stone itself, but in the way the world sees it. For so long, the verdict was fixed. Forgery. Case closed. But time has a way of wearing down even the strongest walls. And lately, small cracks have begun to appear. It started quietly, almost unnoticed. A paper here, a conference talk there, a new generation of researchers with fresh tools and fewer attachments to the old conclusions. They came not to prove or disprove outright, but to ask again, to let the stone be questioned on its own terms, without the shadow of the original verdict leaning over every word. You close your eyes and imagine one of these researchers kneeling in front of the stone in a controlled lab, the air cool and dry, the surface lit by sharp white light. They aren't looking at it with the naked eye alone. They're using microscopes, scanning equipment, tools that can read the surface down to the grain. And what they see there is not what the old verdict would expect. Some of the grooves, they note, have edges softened in a way that suggests centuries of weathering. Far more than 100 years could account for. The wear is uneven, yes, but not random. Certain cuts, particularly those facing upward toward the elements, show patterns that match long-term exposure. Then there's the matter of the lichen. Samples taken from the stone's surface show growth rings that, if interpreted in one way, suggest the stone had been exposed long before 1898. Such evidence is tricky. Lichens don't always grow evenly, but it's enough to plant doubt in the certainty of the recent hoax theory. The language, too, has begun to shift in the scholars' discussions. Those once dismissed rune forms, the ones said to be impossible in the 14th century, are now known from medieval inscriptions discovered after the runestone's unearthing. These matches can't be explained easily if the carver were working only from 19th century books. And so, the conversation changes. Not to full acceptance, not yet, but to a quieter place where words like possibly and perhaps return to the table. You open your eyes again to the present. The moonlight lays pale across the stone, and you wonder how many of these new findings the stone itself could have predicted. It has waited through storms and stillness. It can wait through the slow turning of opinion as well. There's another kind of evidence too, the kind that isn't found in a lab but in the landscape itself. Modern mapping of Minnesota's waterways has revealed routes that align closely with the distances and locations described in the stone's inscription. Places where two skerries might indeed be found. Areas that match a day's travel north to where the stone could stand. It's as if the geography too has begun to speak in the stone's defense. You imagine a young researcher in the field, GPS in hand, following the curves of the rivers and the rise of the land, matching them to the runestone's words. They stand at the edge of a lake, looking at a pair of rocky islands, and wonder if they've just stepped into the view the carver once saw. The skeptics still have their points, and they are not without weight. But the absolutes of the past, impossible, proven false, hoax, are beginning to soften. In their place, a more careful tone is emerging. Not belief exactly, but an acknowledgement that the stone has not yet yielded all its secrets. You breathe deeply, letting the thought settle in you. This is the way of history, perhaps. It shifts, not all at once, but in slow, quiet movements, like the way water wears down stone, and there's something in that image that feels fitting. The runestone itself is a thing of stone, yet it has been shaped by hands, by weather, by the passing of time. Now it is being shaped again, not physically, but in how it is seen. You think back to the fracture between what is known and what is believed. New studies don't close the fracture, they widen it just enough for new possibilities to step through. And in that widening, the story changes. It becomes less about the verdict and more about the ongoing search. Perhaps that is why the stone has endured. Not because it can be proven one way or the other, but because it resists finality. It remains a question that refuses to be silenced. The wind moves again, brushing over the grass, carrying with it the scent of damp earth. Somewhere in the distance, water shifts, a reminder of the rivers that may once have carried the carver here. And as you listen, the question returns, as it always does. But why was it erased from history? Maybe because the truth is not yet ready to be told. Or maybe because the truth is already here, in pieces, and it's easier to pretend those pieces don't fit. The stone waits, the cracks in certainty widen, and somewhere ahead, another part of its story is ready to be seen. The wind drifts low across the field, as though it is carrying more than just air, as though it's bringing in faint echoes from far beyond this place. You keep your hand against the Kensington Runestone, but in your mind you step back far enough to see it not as a single, isolated object, but as part of something larger. Because the truth is, this isn't the only artifact that has asked questions the world wasn't ready to answer. You've heard of them before, objects dug from the earth or pulled from the sea that don't belong to the time or place where they were found. Some sit in museums with cautious labels, others are locked away in storage rooms, their existence mentioned only in passing, and a few, like the runestone, have lived their whole lives under the shadow of a verdict that may not tell their full story. Think of the Antikythera mechanism, a corroded mass of bronze gears brought up from a shipwreck in the Aegean Sea. For decades it was treated as little more than a curiosity, until researchers realized it was an astonishingly complex astronomical calculator, a technology no one believed existed in ancient Greece. Its very presence rewrote the possibilities of what the ancients knew, or the Piri race map, drawn in the 16th century but showing coastlines that official history says should not have been charted, including, some claim, an ice-free outline of Antarctica. Whether those details are real or not, the map remains a puzzle, pointing to knowledge whose origin is still uncertain. There are stranger cases too. Coins from Roman times found buried deep in North America, in layers of soil far older than the accepted date of European contact. Iron nails in ancient ruins where iron shouldn't have been known. Figurines found in rock strata millions of years old, their existence dismissed as contamination, but never fully explained. One by one, you picture them, each an object like the runestone, standing awkwardly at the edge of the story we tell ourselves about the past. Each one either explained away, filed under hoax, or left in quiet limbo where no one asks too many questions. You step back even farther in your mind, and now you see the runestone among them. Not a lone mystery in a Minnesota field, but one star in a constellation of anomalies scattered across the world. On their own, they're easy to dismiss. Together, they begin to trace an outline of something larger, a past that may have been more interconnected, more complex, and more ancient than we've allowed ourselves to imagine. The skeptics say these things don't fit because they are not real. The believers say they don't fit because the story we've been taught is incomplete. And between those two views is a wide, quiet space where the artifacts themselves remain, unbothered by the arguments swirling around them. You imagine a long table in a dimly lit room covered with these objects. At one end, the runestone, its grooves catching the light. Beside it, the Antikythera mechanism, its gears frozen in corrosion. The Piri-Reis map, its edges curled with age. Coins, tools, fragments of pottery, each with its own voice, each speaking in a language we no longer understand. Somewhere in that room, there is a story tying them together. Not a conspiracy, but a pattern. Perhaps they are the survivors of great journeys. Perhaps they are the remnants of civilizations whose names we've forgotten. Or perhaps they are only accidents, scattered pieces that just happen to suggest more than they can prove. The runestone, standing here in its quiet field, belongs to this greater pattern. Whether genuine or not, it represents the same challenge: to look at something that does not fit, and resist the urge to explain it away too quickly. You breathe deeply, letting the thoughts spread through you like the night air. This field is part of a much bigger map, one that stretches across oceans and centuries, linking objects and stories that, at first glance, seem unrelated. The runestone's weight under your hand feels heavier now, as though it carries not just its own history, but the weight of all the other things like it. In the darkness, you imagine a vast network, artifacts as points of light, connected by faint winding lines. Some lines are strong, backed by evidence and study. Others are only possibilities, fragile as threads of spider silk. And somewhere in the middle, the Kensington Runestone glows faintly, steady in its place, waiting for someone to follow its connections. You think of the people who have tried, the researchers who collect such anomalies, hoping that together they might reveal something bigger. Some have been ridiculed, their work dismissed as pseudoscience. Others have spent lifetimes piecing together clues, knowing they may never see the full picture. The wind moves again through the grass, and you let the sound guide you deeper into the idea. Maybe the runestone's true value is not in proving that Norse travellers reached Minnesota in 1362, but in reminding us that the past is not as small as we imagine. It is vast, and most of it remains unseen just beyond the edges of what we can measure. And maybe that is why objects like this are so often pushed aside. They open the door to a history we cannot fully control, one that might be too complex, too untidy, too different from the one we've built our present upon. The stars overhead are cold and clear. You tilt your head back and look at them, thinking about how they too are a map, one that travellers have used for thousands of years. The constellations are another kind of story, one that shifts slightly with each culture, but still points to the same places in the sky. Perhaps the runestone and the other out-of-place artifacts are like that, fixed points that, when connected, reveal paths we can barely imagine. And as you look back at the stone, the question comes again, almost as if from far away this time. But why was it erased from history? Maybe because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. And once you admit there's a pattern, the story of the past is no longer what you thought it was. You take another breath, the cool air filling your lungs, and you let the thought settle. The runestone's place in this larger constellation is secure, It doesn't need agreement or acceptance. It only needs to endure, the same way the stars endure, waiting for someone to follow their lines. The field is quiet again, and the wind moves only in soft strokes across the grass. You keep your hand against the Kensington Runestone, but now your mind drifts far away from this moment, back to a time before Olaf Omen, before museums, for the debates and verdicts. You close your eyes and imagine what it might have been like to be the one who carved it. The air is colder in this vision. The forest around you is deep and thick, the trees towering, their branches holding back much of the sunlight. The smell of pine needles and damp earth fills your lungs. You hear water nearby, a slow, steady flow, and the occasional snap of a branch underfoot. Somewhere in the distance a raven calls, its voice echoing through the trees. You're not alone. Others are here, moving quietly, carrying supplies from a small camp by the water's edge. Their clothes are heavy with the dust of travel, their faces marked by fatigue. You can see the lines of caution in their movements. They have been here long enough to know the land is beautiful, but not without danger. The stone lies flat before you, half buried, its surface smooth enough to take the marks you need to make. You kneel beside it, feeling the weight of the chisel in your hand. This is not work to be rushed. Each stroke must be deliberate, each line deep enough to endure the weather that will surely come. You begin. The first sound is sharp, the ring of metal against stone, but soon it falls into a steady rhythm. The forest listens. Birds grow quiet. The others in your group keep their distance, speaking in low tones, their voices blending with the sound of the river. You know why you are doing this, though you may never see the ones who will read it. The message is simple, but it carries the weight of everything you have seen. You record your people, 8 from Götaland, 22 from Norway. You speak of your journey westward from Vinland. You describe the camp by 2 skerries, those rocky islands now sitting silent in the water. You write of the day you left to fish and the day you returned to find 10 men, red with blood and dead. It is not just a record, it is a warning. You call upon the Virgin Mary to save you from evil, because you have felt it here, not always visible, but present in the air, in the shifting of the forest silence. Your hand aches from the carving. The chisel leaves small chips scattered across the ground, and you brush them away with your palm. You pause often, running your fingers along the grooves to be sure they are deep enough to last. You know the weather here will be hard, snow and rain, freezing and thawing, and you want the message to survive it all. The others come to stand beside you now, looking down at the nearly finished work. Their faces are drawn, but their eyes are steady. You can tell they're thinking of the ones you lost, of the danger that still lingers beyond the trees. You add the date, 1362. Not because you believe the number will mean much to those who find it, but because it marks the moment. It fixes the story in time, even if the rest is lost. When the carving is done, you step back. The stone is heavy, but together you and the others move it toward a place where it will be seen, near the shelter of a tree where the roots will eventually creep over it, where it will remain long after you are gone. Night falls before the work is finished. The fire at camp burns low, and you sit close to it, the sound of the river in your ears. You can still feel the vibration in your hands from the carving, the way each strike of the chisel seemed to carry more than just the words you are making. You think of the people who might find it, whether they will understand, whether they will believe it at all. And here, Centuries later, you stand in the same place, in the same darkness, your hand in the grooves that person left. You can almost feel their presence, the steadiness of their work, the care they took in shaping each symbol. You realize that even if the stone's origins remain debated forever, the act of carving it was an act of hope. Hope that the message would last. Hope that someone, someday, would read it and know they were not the first to stand here. You open your eyes to the present. The moonlight touches the runestone's face, the grooves catching shadow the way they must have caught lamplight, torchlight, even firelight in centuries past. The forest around the field is quieter now, but the sense of presence remains. Maybe that is why the runestone continues to matter, not just because of what it might prove, but because of what it represents. Someone, in another time, stopping to leave a trace. The wind stirs again, and you hear it. The question, always the same, always in the same quiet voice. But why was it erased from history? You let the sound sink into you. Maybe it was erased because the story it told was too far from the one we wanted, or maybe it wasn't erased at all. Maybe it has simply been waiting here, patient as the carver was, for someone to lean close and listen. And tonight, you are listening. The air is cool on your face, and the quiet feels deeper now, as though the night itself has drawn in closer. You keep your hand on the Kensington Runestone, feeling the grooves, the faint warmth the stone has taken from the day's sun now fading into the chill of the evening. Somewhere in the darkness, the echo of the carver's chisel still seems to ring, not in sound but in presence. You let your eyes drift closed, and the timeline of the story floats before you like a long ribbon in the wind. The summer day when Olaf Oman dug the stone from the aspen's roots. The debates in the crowded rooms of scholars, the decades of quiet, the dust of disinterest settling over its name, the new studies, the hints of doubt in the certainty of its dismissal, the legends told around fires long before the world called this place Minnesota. And now, the moment you imagined, the steady hands of a man in 1362, shaping his story into stone. It's all here, stretched out across centuries, and yet so much of it remains out of reach. Maybe that's the truth the runestone is here to teach. That some questions are meant to remain unanswered, not because the answers don't exist, but because the act of seeking them changes us in ways the answers never could. You think of all the people who have stood where you are now, the curious, the skeptical, the hopeful. Each one came looking for something. For some it was proof. For others it was a story. For a few, it was simply the quiet wonder of touching a piece of the past, no matter what that past might be, and each of them left with something different than they expected. That is the nature of a mystery like this. It refuses to be the same thing for everyone. The scholar sees a puzzle to be solved. The storyteller sees a tale to be told. The wanderer sees a marker, proof that they are standing in a place where time folds over itself. You take a deep breath, letting the night fill you. The grass stirs against your legs. The stars overhead seem fixed, but you know they are moving, their light travelling across unimaginable distances to reach you. It's a reminder that even the things that feel eternal are always changing, always in motion. Perhaps the runestone is the same, not in the physical sense. It has not moved from this land in all its long years, but in the way it lives in our minds. It changes shape with each telly, each retelling. It is carved not just into stone, but into the spaces between fact and belief, between history and memory. The truth of it may be beyond reach, and maybe that's all right. Maybe the point is not to own the answer, but to keep the question alive. The question is what makes us look closer, walk farther, listen more deeply. The question keeps the past from becoming just a flat, finished thing. You think of the old maps again, of the rivers, of the stories whispered by those who lived here long before the stone was found. You think of the possibility that somewhere other markers lie waiting, their inscriptions hidden under moss, under soil, under centuries. The world is wide and history is patient. What else might be out there? What else might be waiting for someone to notice? The wind shifts, carrying the scent of water again. You imagine following it, leaving the field and walking through the forest, guided only by the sound of a river in the dark. You imagine finding a rocky shore, a fire burned down to embers, and beside it, another stone, or a piece of wood carved with symbols, or nothing at all, only the sense that something had been there once, and you realize that even if you never find the answer, the search itself is a kind of inheritance. The runestone offers you that, the invitation to keep looking, to keep wondering. You open your eyes and find the stone exactly as it was. The moonlight lies across it, pale and steady, as though the night has been holding this moment for you. The question comes again, as it always does, but softer now. But why was it erased from history? You let it rest in the air without trying to answer. You know now that the asking is what matters, that the question itself is the thread connecting you to the stone, to the carver, to Olaf, to everyone who has paused here in the dark and wondered. Some truths will remain hidden, some stories will never give up their last page, and yet they still shape us. The runestone is one of those stories. Whether it is proof of Norsemen in the heart of America centuries before Columbus, or the work of a later hand, it has become more than its origin. It is a mirror we hold up to ourselves, a way to measure our hunger for the past and our willingness to live with uncertainty. You step back, feeling the grass under your heels, the air cool against your skin. The stone stands where it always has, and you feel no need to move it, no need to force it to speak. Some things are meant to be held in silence, and maybe, just maybe, that silence is the truest part of the story. The night has become very still, the kind of stillness that feels like the world is pausing with you. The grass shifts only slightly, the air is cool but gentle, and the Kensington Runestone stands as it has for centuries, dark against the pale light of the moon, its surface marked with words that have crossed oceans and lifetimes to reach this place. You take one last step closer, your hand resting flat against the stone. The grooves feel familiar now, as if you've traced them 100 times, even though this is only one night. You've followed the story from its unearthing in a Minnesota field, back through the debates, the silence, the re-examination, and the possible journeys that may have brought it here. You've stood in the place of the carver, heard the fireside stories of the land's first peoples, and walked alongside the skeptics and the believers alike. And now there is only the question, the one that has been with you from the beginning. But why was it erased from history? The wind moves softly, but there is no answer. Not the kind you can write down anyway. And maybe, standing here now, you know that an answer isn't the point. The point is that you are asking it, that you've taken the time to stand in this place, to let your mind drift over the centuries, to feel the threads of a story that might never be fully told. History isn't just made of facts carved in stone or inked in books. It's also made of the gaps between them. It's made of the questions we carry forward, the ones we refuse to let go. In that way, the runestone is less a final chapter and more an open door, leading out into a larger, older world. You imagine others standing here after you, in a year, in 10 years, in 100, each of them feeling the same pull, the same quiet weight in the air, each of them running their fingers over the same grooves, wondering about the same men who carved them, and whether they walk away believing in the stone's truth or doubting it, they will carry a piece of it with them. That is how such stories survive. Maybe the runestone was never truly erased from history. Maybe it simply stepped aside, the letting other stories take the center, waiting for those who are willing to seek it out. And maybe that is its greatest strength, that it endures without demanding, waiting quietly until someone like you leans close and listens. You step back, the grass cool beneath your feet, and take in the scene one last time. The moonlight on the stone, the open field stretching into shadow, the faint whisper of the wind in the trees. It feels less like an ending and more like a promise that there are always more stories hidden just beyond the edge of what we know. You breathe deeply, letting the night fill you. The story has taken you from the mists of legend to the desks of scholars, from the quiet of forgotten museum corners to the rivers and forests of a wilder time. It has shown you that the past is not a fixed, unmoving thing, but a living thread winding its way into the present. And now it rests in your hands, because stories like this survive not just in books or museums, but in the minds of those who share them. Every time the runestone is spoken of, in curiosity, in doubt, in wonder, it steps a little farther out of the shadows. Every conversation keeps the question alive. So as you stand here, the night deep around you, let yourself feel the weight of the stone one last time. Let the question echo in you, not as a frustration, but as an invitation. An invitation to look closer at the world around you, to listen for the whispers in the silence, to wonder about what else might be hidden beneath the roots, waiting for us to remember. Because this story doesn't have to end here. Somewhere, perhaps in a field much like this one, another stone may be sleeping under the earth. Somewhere, there might be another mark, another clue, another piece of a puzzle we've barely begun to see. And maybe one day, someone, perhaps even you, will be the one to find it. Until then, the Kensington Runestone will remain, standing quietly in the moonlight, its message carved for those willing to pause, to wonder, and to listen. What else might lie hidden, waiting for us to remember? If you've felt the pull of this mystery tonight, if the runestone has made you pause and think about the wider, deeper past we all share, keep it alive. Share this story with someone who loves a good mystery. Leave a comment about where in the world you're listening from tonight. I'd love to know. And if you want more nights like this, more journeys into the quiet corners of history, make sure you subscribe so we can keep exploring together. And as always, may the silence guide you through the past.